Imagine for a moment that you are the only man in the world who knows where $30 billion are hidden. Not thousands, 30 billion. Hidden inside walls with false backings beneath swimming pools buried on forgotten estates in Antioquia. Tucked away in safe deposit boxes at banks whose names no one even remembers anymore. Now imagine that you are blind, that a letter bomb blew apart your face and left you seeing the world in black and white, with 70% of your hearing gone, and yet, inside your head, you still carry the most expensive map in criminal history. That man exists. He lives in Medellin. He is almost 80 years old, and still today, 3 decades after his brother fell on that rooftop in Los Olivos, there are journalists, lawyers, and federal agents asking themselves the same thing. How much does Roberto Escobar Gaviria really know? What you are about to hear completely changes the official version of the Medellín Cartel. Because the true architect of the empire was never Pablo. Pablo was the face, the one who set off bombs, the one who appeared on the magazine covers, but the one who kept the books, the one who knew how much came in every week, how much was spent on rubber bands to bundle the cash, how much was lost every year to the rats that ate the buried money, was him. His older brother, El Osito. Stay until the end because there is one detail about the hidden stashes that not even the family itself has been able to deny. And you will understand why today there are still somewhere between $5 and $10 billion belonging to the cartel that officially remain missing. And the only man who could say where they are is still alive. But before we step into the empire of the white substance, you have to understand something almost no one tells you about Roberto. And it is that his story doesn't begin in a clandestine laboratory or on a jungle airstrip. It begins on a bicycle, January 13, 1947. Rio Negro, Antioquia. A house with a single room and 2 mattresses where 7 siblings sleep. The father, Abel, is a dry, withdrawn farmer who barely speaks. The mother, Hermilda, is a school teacher and the true force of the family. Roberto, the firstborn, walks 4 hours every day to get to school. At 8 years old, he sells vegetables and castor beans from a little table at the edge of the road. And with his first savings, he buys the object that will define his entire life, a bicycle. What comes next is the detail almost no one uses when they talk about Roberto, and it is staggering. Because Roberto wasn't just a cyclist, he was a genuine elite cyclist. Gold medal at the 1965 Bolivarian Games in Guayaquil. 37 stage victories in a single year. Second athlete of the year in Antioquia, beaten only by the world champion Martín Emilio Cochise Rodriguez. 3 editions of the Vuelta a Colombia, 2 RCN Classics, the 1966 Pan American Games in Chile. And the nickname that would later appear in court files and DEA lists was given to him by a radio reporter purely by chance. Roberto was leading a stage through torrential rain on an unpaved road. The tires kicked up so much mud onto his face that it left it completely covered, except for his eyes. And when he crossed the finish line, the announcer shouted into the microphone, "Here comes Roberto Escobar Gaviria, who looks more like a little bear." The nickname stuck. That word would decades later end up signing lawsuits against Netflix, against Elon Musk, against Samsung, and appearing in Colombian intelligence reports as the number 2 in the hierarchy of the most violent cartel of the 20th century. But there is one image you have to hold on to, because it explains everything. Roberto, 10 years old, his brother Pablo, 8, sitting on the handlebars. Riding the bicycle up the Alto de Minas, a mountain pass nearly 2,500 meters high, to watch Ramon Hoyos defeat the Italian Fausto Coppi. There, in that moment, Pablo Escobar fell in love with cycling, and 30 years later, that love of bicycles was going to cost billions of dollars. When the cartel was at the peak of its power, the Escobars built a private velodrome in Medellin. International professional cyclists charged fortunes to come and ride there on a closed circuit just for the 2 brothers. The transition has a date, 1975. Roberto founds a bicycle frame factory in Manizales. He calls it Osito with a double T to sound Italian and lend it prestige. At first, it is a legal business. He sponsors teams, hires the coach Ruben Dario Gomez, pays good riders. But there is one detail that appears in the Colombian archives and that almost no one highlights. On the riders' jerseys, you didn't read only Bicicletas Osito. You also read Pablo Escobar, Liberal Renewal. Pablo was getting into politics, and Roberto was using cycling to launder the money that was already starting to flow in from the green substance boom, from the smuggling of electrical appliances, and from something few people mention: the theft of headstones from the small cemeteries of Antioquia, which were later resold in distant towns. The factory was the front. The laboratory was something else entirely. And here comes the first major turn, because there is a dream that Roberto chased and that ended in a bomb. 1981. Pablo puts up serious money so that the Osito team can become the first Colombian team to ride the Tour de France. Roberto wants something more. He wants to be president of the National Cycling Federation, and he clashes head-on with the man in charge of Colombian cycling, Miguel Ángel Bermúdez. While Roberto travels to the World Championships in Bonn with his Kodak 110 camera, Bermúdez consolidates his power and pushes him aside. The payback comes a year later, 1982. A bomb explodes in Bermúdez's car. Bermúdez survives by a miracle, and the Escobar brothers vanish forever from public cycling. The first circle closes. Cycling, which had been the passion, becomes the first official warning of what the clan was about to become. Now, there is something you need to understand before we get into the numbers of the empire, because it is the key to everything that follows. And it is that while Pablo was explosive, media-hungry, political, deeply megalomaniacal, Roberto was exactly the opposite. Silent, cold, methodical, calm, prone to going unnoticed. And that is why, when the money started arriving in amounts no one in the world had ever seen before, Pablo trusted only one person to count it. Because there is a rule in this business that holds without exception: the one who counts the money has more power than the one who earns it. And Pablo knew it. So when someone asks you who Roberto Escobar really was, the short answer is this: he was the official head of finances of the Medellín Cartel. That is how he appears in the Colombian court files. But the long answer is far darker. Because between 1987 and 1988, according to intelligence sources, Roberto was also the head of the gunmen. The cartel's accountant had a period in which he directly ran the machinery of the shooters. He denies it in his book. But the record is there, and it completely changes the idea of the quiet brother. And now, let's get to the numbers. Because what Roberto recounts in his autobiography, published in 2009 with the American writer David Fisher under the title The Accountant's Story, is from another planet. Roberto and 10 accountants who reported to him kept the books of the empire. 10 accountants, working under his orders. And only 2 people in the world knew exactly where all the money was stored and what was being bought with it. Pablo and him. No one else. What they spent each month on rubber bands just to bundle the stacks of bills came to $2,500 a month. I'll repeat that. $2,500 on rubber bands every month, just to hold the weight of the paper money. Every year, according to Roberto's own calculation, they lost around 10% of the physical cash. What they called spoilage. Deterioration. That clean accounting word hides a far more grotesque image. It meant that every year around $2 billion in cash rotted buried on estates, soaked up the damp of the walls, decomposed in basements, or literally were eaten by rats. 2 billion eaten by rodents every year. By the end of the 80s, according to Forbes magazine, Pablo was the 7th richest man in the world. They estimated his fortune at $6 billion. Roberto maintains that it was far more. He calculates that at the moment of Pablo's death, the clan's total fortune was somewhere around $30 billion, which adjusted to today comes close to $70 billion. Tons of the white substance left every week heading for the United States and Europe. At their peak, they controlled up to 80% of the North American market. Weekly takings were estimated to reach $420 million per week. A public reward of $10 million hung over the heads of the 2 brothers. And where was all of that kept? This is where the account becomes almost impossible to believe. Secret compartments behind walls with false backings. Bunkers beneath swimming pools. Stashes under kitchen tiles. Entire warehouses with no labels. Banks cooperating. Industrial storehouses. They bought art to launder money. Dalí, Picasso, Velázquez, Miró, Botero. The estimates speak of more than 3,500 works in the clan's possession. And there is one visual detail that you cannot erase from your mind because 3 different sources tell it, including the painter Botero's own granddaughter. When the cartel's men went to look for old stashes, the first thing they found was not clean bundles. They found heaps of nibbled bills smelling of damp and of animal, and nests of rats made of dollars. The rats were literally breeding among the money. If you are wondering how they physically moved such an amount of cash, the answer involves a private fleet of planes and helicopters that Roberto managed personally. Pablo bought his first plane before he was 30. By the end of the 80s, they had dozens of aircraft. One of those small planes sat for decades at the entrance of Hacienda Nápoles like a trophy. That estate, by the way, covered 20 square kilometers. A private airstrip, artificial lakes, 2 museums of collector cars inside, a replica of the James Bond motorcycle, and a private zoo with hippos, giraffes, elephants, rhinos. What you may not know is that the hippos descended from that zoo are still alive today, loose in the Magdalena River, turned into an ecological plague that the Colombian government has not managed to eradicate. It is the biological legacy, literally, of Roberto's administrative management of Nápoles. But there is something more, and it may be the strangest detail of all. The question any normal person asks is, did a real ledger exist? Did Roberto write things down somewhere? The answer is ambiguous, and that is exactly why it is so powerful. Roberto claims that he and his 10 accountants kept encrypted internal records, alphanumeric codes, keys. But no official ledger was ever made public. The only thing we know for certain is that there existed at least one identification code that he handled, known as AAA. Because years later, after Pablo's death, Roberto handed it to his nephew Juan Pablo, who was 16 at the time, so that he could enter the United States Embassy and meet with the head of the DEA in Colombia. And that code, AAA, later became one of the central pieces of evidence that Juan Pablo Escobar himself uses publicly today to accuse his uncle of having secretly collaborated with the American Anti-Narcotics Agency. We'll come back to this because it is the detail that splits the family forever. Before that, let me tell you something almost no one knows, and that is probably the wildest anecdote of the clan. There is a less famous alias for Roberto, one that only appears in transcripts of phone intercepts by Colombian intelligence from 1990. In one recorded conversation, a cartel boss nicknamed Caliche refers to Roberto not as Osito, but as Samuel. He mentions him as the possible successor to Gustavo Gaviria Rivero, Pablo's cousin and partner, El León, who had just been taken out on August 11, 1990 by the elite corps. Until then, Roberto ran a relatively small operation in the coffee-growing region. After Gustavo's death, Pablo gave him a direct order: move to Antioquia and take total control of the shipments and, in the words of Colombian intelligence, of the terrorist management of the cartel. Roberto, the accountant, stopped being only the accountant. He became the second man of the most violent cartel on the planet. And here comes the first real turning point of the story, because all of that leads you straight to a luxury prison built in the mountains, where the story of El Osito takes a turn that not even the best fiction could write. La Catedral, June 1991. A prison built on land owned by the Escobars themselves near Envigado. Pablo turns himself in under the Colombian government's promise of no extradition. 2 days later, Roberto turns himself in as well. The walls of La Catedral were made of plaster, not concrete. Inside there was a gym, a bar, billiard tables, imported paintings, a panoramic view of Medellin. It was a maximum comfort prison disguised as a maximum security one. Roberto lived there for 13 months alongside the most dangerous men of the cartel: Popeye, Otto, Mugre, Tato, El Mago, La Garra, Icopor. A list of nicknames that today sounds like something out of a cartoon, but who back then were responsible for hundreds of lives taken. On July 22, 1992, between 2 and 5 in the morning, Pablo and 10 other men escaped. They kicked through a plaster wall. They took advantage of the fog and a blackout known in Medellin as the Gaviria Hour. And according to a soldier's testimony, Pablo walked out dressed as a woman wearing a wig. The most wanted criminal in the world escaped in disguise, while the others dressed as guards, farmers, and well-dressed civilians. And Roberto? Here there is a detail reconstructed from the statements of Nicolas Escobar, his own son, given to an Argentine outlet. Throughout that whole night, father and son communicated by phone in code. They spoke of dinners and breakfasts. Each phrase was really a checkpoint that had been cleared. The last call came at 4:30 in the morning. The escape was a success, and meanwhile, in grandmother Hermilda's kitchen, a chicken stew was being prepared that the gunman carried to the fugitives' meeting point. Roberto separated from Pablo, and here something happens that is rarely told. 79 days after the escape, on October 8, 1992, Roberto turned himself into the authorities again, alone, without Pablo. Pablo would remain a fugitive for 14 more months until he was brought down on a rooftop on December 2, 1993. But Roberto, the accountant, decided that his place was in prison. And that decision, made in silence, was going to cost him far more dearly than he himself ever imagined. Because 16 days after Pablo's death, what came to physically define the rest of his life happened. The letter bomb, December 17th or 18th, 1993. Maximum security prison of Itagüí. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Family visiting hours. Roberto receives a manila envelope. Official letterhead of the Office of the Attorney General. And here comes the cruelest detail of the whole story, because Roberto, months earlier, had formally requested that his official correspondence not be subjected to inspection. So the envelope with the Attorney General's letterhead was not inspected. He opened it himself. What came next was a sophisticated device that detonated in his face. 2 guards, Isidro Molina and William Tirado, were injured. Roberto took shrapnel in his left eye and in his abdomen. He was taken to the Las Vegas clinic in El Poblado and then to the military hospital. He was left with after effects that would never leave his body. Loss of 80% of his sight, loss of 70% of his hearing, permanent damage to his sense of smell. Roberto says that since that day he can only see the world in black and white. The big question is who sent that letter. And here the clues converge on one name: Los Pepes, persecuted by Pablo Escobar, a paramilitary organization led by the brothers Fidel and Carlos Castaño, with operational support from the Cali Cartel and tacit connections to the Colombian State's search block. Between January and December 1993, Los Pepes took out more than 300 people connected to the Medellín Cartel. Lawyers, accountants, family members, gunmen. They painted the word Pepes on the bodies. The letter bomb sent to Roberto fits exactly into that logic of annihilation in the wake of Pablo. Roberto sued the Colombian State. In the first instance, he won. But the Council of State reversed the decision in a ruling written by the magistrate Enrique Gil Botero, arguing that the responsibility lay not with INPEC but with Roberto himself, because it had been he who requested that his correspondence not be inspected. He lost that legal battle definitively. He did not receive a single peso in compensation. But there is a moment within this story that is probably the secret pivot of the entire family war that followed, and it is the nephew's visit to the military hospital. Immediately after the attack, Juan Pablo Escobar, 16 years old, went to see his uncle. And according to Juan Pablo's own version, today known as Sebastián Marroquín, that was where Roberto confessed to him that he was in the middle of negotiating with the DEA, that there were efforts underway to get them American visas, and that they needed something in return: information, data, names, and very probably where the millions Pablo had left hidden were stored. That visit is the origin of the conflict that has split the Escobar clan for more than 30 years. And you still haven't seen the most powerful part. Roberto leaves prison, according to the most reliable sources, in 2003 or 2004 after approximately 11 effective years between La Catedral and Itagüí. He leaves on parole, with an express prohibition against leaving Colombia. And the first thing he does almost immediately is write. In 2009, he publishes, with the American writer David Fisher, the book The Accountant's Story. The story of the accountant. The sentence that opens the autobiography is probably the best opening line in all of 21st century criminal literature. I have many scars. Some are physical, but many more are scars of the soul. A bomb sent to eliminate me while I was in a maximum security prison has left me blind, but now I see the world more clearly than ever before. The book was an immediate commercial success and a simultaneous family scandal, because there Roberto revealed, among other things, the figures I already told you. The 10 accountants, the rubber bands, the 10% lost every year. But he also dropped a political bombshell. He claimed that Pablo had donated $1 million to Alberto Fujimori's electoral campaign in Peru, and that he had met with Vladimiro Montesinos personally at Hacienda Nápoles. That claim, according to Juan Pablo, was one of the drops that overflowed the cup of the family war. We were surprised that my uncle took part in publishing that information and that it triggered President Fujimori's resignation, the son of Pablo declared years later. Today, Juan Pablo, now under his new name, Sebastián Marroquín, lives in Buenos Aires, works as an architect, and gives lectures all over the world. And whenever he can, he repeats 4 concrete accusations against his uncle. First, that he kept $6 specific million that Pablo had left for the cartel's prisoners and for the widow. Second, that he made a deal with the DEA. Third, that he published the book with false information in exchange for visas. And fourth, that the AAA code that he himself received from his uncle was the clearest proof that the collaboration with the federal agency was real. Roberto, for his part, has always defended his version. Please, he said in an interview with Caracol Radio, let Nicholas not deceive people and not tell lies. It is false that a stash was found here. He was talking about his own son, because within the family war there is also his son Nicholas Escobar, who in 2006, one day after grandmother Hermilda's death, ordered the exhumation of Pablo's body and sold the images to television. He kept 3 of the boss's teeth and a piece of his mustache, claiming they would serve as DNA evidence for future paternity claims by unrecognized children. That exhumation, authorized by Nicholas, opened an open war against Juan Pablo Escobar and against Pablo's direct branch of the family. But there is a third testimony, that of Alba Marina Escobar, the sister, who has her own version. When an Infobay journalist asked her in April 2025 whether it was true that she had seen millions buried, she answered, "Not a single dollar." Pablo did not handle cash. She maintained that the money was invested in the people and spent on the war against the state. He built a neighborhood, and he took on a war against the United States and the Cali men. How much does a war cost? About Pablo's children, she said something devastating. I do not consider them my nephews for how badly they have spoken of Pablo, despite how good he was to them. Roberto says one thing, Juan Pablo says something completely different, Alba Marina says a third. The 3 versions are irreconcilable. And among those 3 voices, lost somewhere in the rural landscape of Antioquia, there still remain, according to the calculations of specialized journalists, between $5 and $10 billion of the Medellín Cartel that were officially never recovered. The strangest thing of all is that Roberto's story does not end with his release from prison. A second life begins that is, in many ways, stranger than the first. And here a Swede with an odd alias enters the scene. Roberto partners with a Swedish businessman named Olof Quiros Gustafsson, alias Sir Olaf. Together they reincorporate in California a company called Escobar Inc. The idea is to register the successor in interest rights over the name, image, and brand of Pablo Escobar. In July 2015, they obtain the formal registration. What comes next is a sequence of business moves that border on the absurd, but that really happened, and are documented in federal courts. In 2016, Escobar Inc. sends a letter to Netflix demanding $1 billion for alleged intellectual property violations committed by the series Narcos. The exact phrase used in the letter was, "If we do not receive the payment, we will close down your little show." A year later, in September 2017, in Temascalapa, Mexico, a location scout named Carlos Muñoz Portal, who worked for Netflix searching for filming spots, had his life taken. Roberto distanced himself from the killing and publicly stated that Netflix needed to hire gunmen for security. In January 2018, after Netflix challenged him legally, Escobar Inc. quietly abandoned the dispute. In January 2019, Roberto launches a GoFundMe asking for $50 million to remove President Donald Trump from office. The platform took the campaign down the next day. In July 2019, he began selling a propane torch for $249, presenting it as a flamethrower, and publicly accused Elon Musk and the Boring Company of having stolen his idea. The phrase with which he justified the product was one for the ages. "I want people to be able to burn money like Pablo and I used to do." He demanded $100 million in cash or in Tesla shares. Musk replied with a curt tweet, "It's not a flamethrower, Mr. Escobar." The lawsuit never formally materialized, and then came the biggest fraud of all. December 2019, Escobar Inc. launches the Escobar Fold 1, a supposedly revolutionary folding phone sold for $350. In reality, it was a Chinese Royal FlexPi with the logo swapped out. In February 2020 came the Escobar Fold 2 at $499. In reality, it was a Samsung Galaxy Fold with golden stickers placed over the original logo. The technology journalist Marques Brownlee exposed it on YouTube in June 2020. And from there, the collapse began. Customers paid and never received the phone. They received a book about Pablo Escobar or a printed certificate of ownership, complete with a tracking number so that PayPal and Stripe would reject the disputes. Only a few tech influencers received working units precisely to keep alive the illusion that the product existed. According to the federal documents filed in Los Angeles, Escobar Inc. defrauded between 500 and 600 people. In December 2023, Olaf Gustafsson, the CEO, was arrested in Marbella. In March 2025, he was extradited to Los Angeles under a federal indictment of 115 counts. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Conspiracy to commit money laundering. 41 counts of domestic laundering. 35 counts of international laundering. In July 2025, he pleaded guilty to 6 of those counts. He agreed to pay $1,300,000 in restitution. Sentencing was scheduled for December 2025 in a Los Angeles court, and the legitimate question anyone asks is, what role did Roberto play in all of this? He appeared signing the press releases, he showed up in the promotional videos. His name was the brand. But the operational brains of the scheme was the Swede. Roberto, already past 80, blind in 80% of one eye, nearly deaf, maintains that he was a face and little more. The American justice system seems to have accepted that version, at least for now. There are still 2 more stories you have to know because they close the circle of the character. The first is from the year 2008. Roberto called a press conference with Medellin, and he declared, looking into the camera, that he had discovered the cure and the vaccine for AIDS. He said he had been researching since the 80s. He sought to contact the administration of Barack Obama to fund a clinic in Medellin. His phrase was, "You can now tell the world that for a time none of the patients using the medication has died." He refused to reveal the formula, claiming he was processing a patent. He never presented scientific evidence. He never registered the medication. No clinic ever appeared. The international medical community ignored him. But the record exists. The brother of Pablo Escobar in 2008 announced to the world that he had cured AIDS. The second story is that of the museum. After leaving prison, Roberto turned one of the family's houses in the Las Palmas neighborhood of El Poblado into a museum dedicated to Pablo. He charged 120,000 Colombian pesos per entry, roughly $30 per person. He received thousands of tourists. There were armored vehicles with bullet impacts, motorcycles, The historic small plane from Naples, physical stashes that visitors could climb into. Pablo's original poncho, the famous photo of the boss with his son in front of the White House, tables with false bottoms, the wanted $10 million posters. Roberto signed autographs. He posed with tourists. He charged dollars in cash. In 2018, the mayor's office of Medellin shut it down for the first time. In 2019, it was closed for good. In July 2023, Roberto personally demolished another house museum before the authorities arrived. And in March 2024, the Special Assets Agency and the police closed the last main house museum and confiscated all the objects. The property was valued at $3 million. In January 2025, the SAE carried out evictions on 2 additional properties in Caldas worth more than $1,200,000. Today, in May 2026, Roberto Escobar Gaviria is still alive. He is 79 years old. He lives in Medellin on parole with no possibility of leaving Colombia. His daughter Laura runs a family museum that competes with the one he used to manage. His son Nicholas is at odds with his nephew Juan Pablo in the public war over the hidden stashes. His partner Olof Gustafsson awaits sentencing in a California court. And he, according to statements to local journalists, says he lives with just the bare necessities. What no one has ever been able to answer, not the federal lawyers, not the journalists, not even the members of the clan, is the original question. The one that gives the title to his book and to this story. How much does Roberto truly know about where the missing money is? Because between what has been confiscated, what has been auctioned off, what was seized by the Colombian State, and what was recovered in Argentina through the case against the widow Maria Isabel Santos, there are still billions missing that officially never turned up. There are estates in Antioquia where stashes are still being found. They appear from time to time, small, rotted, but they appear. And the only living man who kept the real accounting of the empire, the only one who had the 10 accountants under his command, the only one who spent 79 days free after escaping and then decided to turn himself in alone, is still there, in Medellin. Almost blind, almost deaf, but still talking. And there is a sentence of his written on the first page of his book that takes on a different meaning when you understand the whole story. He says the bomb left him blind, but that now he sees the world more clearly than ever. What exactly is it that he sees? What is it that he knows and has chosen not to say? On what estate? Behind what wall with a false backing? Beneath what old swimming pool are there still dollars nibbled by rats waiting for someone to find them? Do you really believe that a man who kept such precise accounts, capable of calculating to the gram how much was spent on rubber bands, could have truly forgotten where he left $30 billion? Leave me your opinion in the comments.